Hello there and a very warm welcome to 1000 PS TV. Today we're looking at the Tiger 900 GT Pro, in other words a touring enduro, or the Tiger Sport 800, which is more of a crossover or sport tourer, is the better choice for a 2000 kilometer trip. Stay tuned. Before I get into my impressions from Scotland, just a quick explanation. Normally we have an arsenal of fantastic camera crew, but unfortunately none of them were able to join me in Scotland this time. That's why I went all out with Insta360. The normal camera for the POP stories is the Ace Pro 2, which we've been using since this year. And then the really cool shots, especially in such an impressive landscape like Scotland, hopefully turned out well with the X5 from Insta360. Please give me your feedback on that and enjoy the video. I had the good fortune of spending 12 days traveling around Scotland. Ralf from Feel Good Reisen put together a wonderful loot for me along the NC500, where I was able to combine, let's say, a bit of holiday with a bit of work. And Triumph was kind enough to provide me with two bikes for this trip. One for me and one for my companion, who is 1.75 meters tall. So you also get a bit of a different perspective on what it's like to sit on the Pillion seat. And this NC500 really does have a legendary reputation among us motorcyclists for good reason. It's the northernmost road on the Scottish mainland. It's called NC500 because it runs for roughly 500 miles, starting from Inverness on the Scottish coast and looping all the way around from east to west. But we didn't just stick to that. For example, we also went off the NC500 onto the Isle of Skye, or took one or two routes inland. Now let's get to the bikes. We've got a classic touring enduro here with the 900 GT Pro and the sport tourer, the new Tiger Sport 800. And then there's this one. The term sport tourer is actually a bit of a thing from the past. Nowadays we tend to talk more about crossover motorcycles. Why? Because the longer suspension travel that originally came from touring enduros, combined with the sporty engine concept and the seating position and so on, has really been borrowed from sportier bikes. That means here we've actually got quite a lot of suspension travel. Of course, with the Tiger 900 GT Pro you get even more, but even so, this is the road-focused version of the Tiger family in the 900 range. There's also the Rally Pro, which we've already tested with its 21-inch front wheel. This time though, I was mainly on the road, in fact pretty much exclusively on the road. And that's why these two bikes made sense for me and also why they caught my interest, because price-wise they're relatively close to each other. Here we've got the Pro version, but there is also a significantly cheaper one available. I think it's around 2,000 euros cheaper for the GT version, but then you have to go without features like heated seats or the quickshifter. All in all though, that brings it pretty close to the price of the Tiger Sport 800. So that's definitely a decision you might have to make. We started our journey in Edinburgh, we flew there, and that's where we picked up the bikes from Triumph, and straight away we had to, well, weave our way through city traffic fully loaded, both bikes with panniers and top case. And with that, I'd like to kick off this chapter. How does a touring enduro perform, and how does a sport tourer, a crossover, handle in city riding? For me personally, at 1.87 meters tall, I actually prefer a touring enduro in the city, because thanks to the high handlebars and that upright riding position, you've got the advantage of being able to see right over the mirrors of the cars. So basically, sleeping in between the cars. Now of course, with the massive luggage setup, that was less of a thing. And of course, both bikes have quite a bit of weight added with all that kit. Just briefly on the topic of payload, which might be interesting. Both are rated at 222 kilos for the GT Pro
and 224 kilos respectively, more than enough to ride 2 up, even with full luggage, and that's exactly what we did. There'll also be a short blog about that in this video. But in the city, it does mean you're hauling around quite a bit of weight. Fully fueled, both bikes come in well beyond 220 kilos, with the Tiger Sport being a bit lighter. Exact figures aren't available this time, as you're used to from us, because of course we didn't have our patented cattle scale with us. But with the full setup, panniers, cases, and all the kit, you're definitely talking around 240 kilos and maybe even a bit more, 245 or 250. And in city riding, that can of course get a bit tiresome. But with the touring enduro, what really helped me was the steering lock. And I think that's something inherent to this type of bike. The steering lock is simply better than on a classic crossover or sport tourer. With the GT Pro, I found things noticeably easier. The Tiger Sport, on the other hand, showed a bit of weakness here, because with the limited steering lock, maneuvering backwards was just that little bit more awkward. On the flip side though, the Tiger Sport does have a lower center of gravity. It's easier to handle, and it also comes with a slightly lower seat height of 835 millimeters compared to 840 on the 900 GT Pro. However, that can be lowered further down to 820. So this really is a touring enduro that's also well suited and recommendable for shorter riders. And overall, it's fairly easy to handle. Of course, things like hauling it up onto the center stand, which by the way comes as standard on the Pro, does require a fair bit of strength. As a slimmer rider, you might be reaching the limits of what's manageable here, whereas with the 800 things are a lot easier because it's noticeably more nimble. The higher weight of the GT Pro does make itself felt a bit when riding slowly. And with that, since I've already been talking about the ride, let's move out of the city and onto the motorway, which is where we headed next. I'll say it straight away. Both of these bikes are excellent on the motorway. It really comes down a bit to your personal preference. The GT Pro is a touch more comfortable here thanks to its cruise control, which is a bit more advanced. You can adjust it by 1 unit of speed at a time with a button press. The Sport also comes with cruise control as standard, but it's a much simpler version. You press the button, it holds the speed, and when you brake or pull the clutch, it switches off again. Whereas here with the advanced system, you've got a reset mode that lets you get back to your desired speed at the push of a button. Wind protection is also a very relevant topic on the motorway. And here the two bikes differ more than you might think at first glance. Both come with windscreens that can be adjusted with one hand even while riding. The adjustment range is 5 centimeters on the GT Pro and a little less, though still close to 5 centimeters, on the Tiger Sport. So in terms of height, there's really not much between them. However, the windscreen on the 800 is noticeably wider. That meant my shoulders were beautifully shielded from the wind. With the helmet though, I did get a kind of cut-off edge that caused a bit of buffeting. That was my experience at 1 meter 87 tall. My companion at 1 meter 75 said she was perfectly sheltered from the wind. For her, the wind protection on the 800 was actually better than on the bigger sister. For me, it was exactly the other way around. The Tiger Sport screen is quite narrow at the top, which means you get more wind pressure on the shoulders and also more wetness, which we definitely felt here. But in return, it can be adjusted higher. And at 1 meter 87, even in the taller seat position, I could still get myself completely out of the airflow and out of the rain too, which of course was very pleasant. Both pannier systems handled 130 kilometers per hour, that's 80 miles per hour, without any trouble at all. No wobbling, no instability creeping into the bike, everything was perfectly fine. And on the motorway, when you're clocking up the kilometers, you naturally start to notice, how am I actually sitting? How good or how bad is the seating position? And between these two bikes, that really does feel quite different. The Sport, the Tiger Sport, already says it in the name, a sharper knee angle, no adjustable seating position. The saddle, which kind of forces you into one riding posture, is also not padded quite as nicely as on the 900, but it's not bad either. It does its job. And for some people, the seating position is actually preferable. You can still cover long stretches in one go. Personally though, I felt much more comfortable on the 900. Here the knee angle is more relaxed, and I also prefer sitting on the bike rather than in the bike. And with that, I'd like to move on to pillion riding, which we also tried out. The Tiger 900 offers a bit more space, roomier overall, and above all, the more comfortable pillion seat in terms of padding. On the Tiger Sport 800, the pillion really sits up in the gallery with pretty much no wind protection at all. Both of our bikes were fitted with Triumph top cases that had backrests. Although my companion actually said that the backrest on the Sport was noticeably more comfortable because it adapted better to the contour of her back, even with a back protector, compared to the thicker padding on the 900 GT Pro, which pressed a bit into her lower back. Apart from that, the two-stage heated seats here were of course very much appreciated, and in terms of the Pillion's knee angle, there isn't much difference between the two, so both bikes are absolutely pillion friendly. Another important point when riding two-up is of course adjusting the rear suspension preload. On the GT Pro, this is wonderfully easy to do via the display. Just a simple setting, adjust the preload, and the rear end lifts electronically. A super fine feature and one that you actually end up using. On the Sport 800, the preload is also adjustable, as is the rebound damping. The preload is set with the hand wheel at the rear, also very practical. Just turn it up, and in both cases it's quick and easy to do. On the Pro, on the luxury machine, it's a bit more comfortable. But here on the Sport, it's just as good and perfectly sufficient. And adjusting the preload is especially important because it raises the bike and ensures you get the full suspension travel, 170 millimeters on the 900 GT Pro and 150 on the Sport. That becomes particularly relevant once you leave the motorway, and with that we move on to the country roads. Because here in Scotland we did come across the odd pothole. You really have to watch out. Something we're not quite as used to at home, at least not in this kind of intensity. And that's where it was, of course, very important that the rear suspension was properly set. Out on the country roads, the biggest difference you notice is that the 900 GT has a 19-inch front wheel, while the Tiger Sport 800 runs a 17-inch front wheel. And especially when switching directly between the two, you can really feel that the Tiger Sport lives up to its name. It's definitely the more agile one, the handier, more nimble bike. That's a very typical naked bike tire setup, and it really did its job brilliantly. The Michelin Road 5 is actually a bit of a benchmark tire for me when you don't need the absolute high-end option. And it really did a great job here too, even in varying weather conditions. We had lots of rain, often greasy road surfaces and blind corners. You also have to get used to riding on the left. Right-hand bends were somehow more pleasant here because they were often visible, whereas the left-hand bends were blind. For us back home, it's exactly the other way around. But the tire really shone in all that. Even on road markings, which always get very slippery when wet, I had hardly any concerns. And the same goes for the Scorpion Trail 3, the high-end premium tire fitted to the 900 GT Pro. Both of them had really nice grip and a short warm-up time, which was especially important because even in June, when we were there, daytime highs didn't go beyond 9 to 13 degrees. And on top of that, we often had damp conditions. So here it's important not to skimp on tires. And given the landscape, we can't avoid talking about the engines as well. We've got two Triumph triples here, one with 888 cubic centimeters and one with 798 cubic centimeters. But the biggest difference in my view isn't actually the displacement. That's relatively comparable. The biggest difference is that the Tiger 900 GT Pro engine comes in the so-called T-plane configuration, meaning with an offset crank pin. That creates a different firing order designed to imitate a twin-cylinder engine, which gives it a deliberately rougher character compared to the smoother, classic triple in the Tiger Sport. That one is based on the street triple engine, and in my opinion, it's been executed really well. In terms of figures, here we've got 84 Newton meters and 115 horsepower, while on the 900 you've got 90 Newton meters of maximum torque and a peak output of 108 horsepower. So on paper, they're really very similar, but the Tiger Sport 800 engine almost always felt more forceful to me, partly because it carries a bit less weight, but mainly because it builds its power in such a perfectly linear way. You've got a solid base level to ride on, and then when you rev it 2,000 or 3,000 higher, I'd say from around 5,000 to 6,000, that's when things really kick off, it really takes off. And the GT Pro, with its most recent engine update compared to its predecessors, also gives you more joy at the top end, I'd say. But it does feel a little more strained. I think that's down in part to this offset crank pin, which makes it all feel not quite as free and effortless as on the Tiger Sport. That engine really is a gem. Both models come with ride modes as standard. Here on the Sport, we've got 3, Road, Sport and Rain. And on the GT Pro, we've got 5, Road, Sport, Rain, Off-Road, plus a customizable rider mode. The ride modes also influence the cornering sensitive rider aids. Both bikes come with ABS and traction control that work in lean angles, thanks to the standard IMU. On the GT Pro, the ride mode also affects the damping setup of the rear shock. That can also be fine-tuned manually in the menu to suit your preference, either more comfort-oriented or dialed in for sportiness. But to be fair, Triumph has done a great job with the presets. They work really well straight away. And that brings us on to the suspension. On the GT Pro, we've got a bit more travel, 180 millimeters at the front, 170 at the rear, compared to the Tiger Sport, which has 150 millimeters at both ends. I have to say though, in everyday use here on the Scottish backroads, there really wasn't all that much between them. The Tiger 900 GT Pro is the slightly more comfortable, more refined machine. You've got more adjustment options for the rear shock. On the Sport 800, you'd have to do that manually. Outside of preload, I didn't actually change anything on the Tiger Sport, to be honest, because the base setup was really good. It struck a nice balance between comfort and sportiness. Whereas on the GT Pro, you can fine-tune things via the display, so of course you end up playing around with it a bit. Otherwise, in terms of suspension response, the GT Pro comes with Marzocchi components, while the Tiger Sport 800 uses Showa elements. On the Sport, they're really top quality, no question. The GT Pros are good too, but you can feel they've saved a little compared to the more luxurious Touring Enduro. And that's perhaps something you can say in general. Touring Enduros usually have the advantage when it comes to suspension adjustability, simply because there's more travel to work with, giving you more room to play with the setup, especially if it's adjustable like here. The sportier machines, with their more limited suspension travel, just have a bit less potential. And when you start to push things a bit harder on these bikes, what really stands out is the quickshifter, which comes as standard on both. It's really well executed. Once again though, I'd give a slight edge to the Sport because the traditional triple concept just suits it better. The tuning feels that bit more precise. On the 900 it also works well, but on both bikes it's true that at partial load they're not as smooth as when you're riding more aggressively. On the Tiger 900 it's a little rougher, a little harsher, but we're really talking about nitpicking at a very high level here. When you pick up the pace, it's important to have proper braking power on tap. And here, both bikes delivered. Of course, on the GT Pro with the Brembo Stylomer calipers, you've got the higher end hardware, and the discs at the front are also 10 millimeters larger, 320 instead of 310 on the Tiger Sport. But honestly, both of them gave a really solid braking performance. We're really spoiled these days. Even a Touring Enduro comes with brakes this sporty, and they'll stop you with just one finger, absolutely top class. Which is why I was actually surprised when switching over to the Sport, because it too offered outstanding stopping power. There's really nothing to worry about. Both bikes brake brilliantly. The feel is great, they bite well even when you're leaned over. And in fact, the Sport has a slight advantage there, thanks to the smaller front wheel diameter, which makes it turn in more willingly under braking than the 19-inch wheel up front on the GT Pro. But purely in terms of braking performance, there's really very little between them. So at the end of this trip, it also came down to those little things that you notice after 12 days In the saddle, things like how many helmets fit into which case or what the average fuel consumption is. And that's what I can share with you now. With the cases, the top case on both models takes almost 2 full-face helmets, in our case the Schubert concept, and even with the Cardo system mounted. That's not something you can take for granted, because often it's exactly those extra 3 or 4 centimeters on either side of the helmet that make it impossible to fit inside the top case. But here that wasn't an issue, it worked fine on both bikes. And with the panniers, it's the same. One of them will take a full face helmet while the other is smaller. On the Tiger 900 GT Pro, it's more obvious because of the high mounted exhaust. The pannier on the exhaust side is much smaller, while the other one is bigger. From the back, it does look asymmetrical, but for all the perfectionists out there, don't worry, it's fine. On the Tiger Sport 800, for some reason I can't quite understand, I guess because they had this case lying around from another model. You get panniers that we've already seen with other manufacturers. One of them has a small taper, which makes it impossible to fit a helmet inside. But overall, you can fit 3 helmets across each bike, which is more than enough. Now, despite really ambitious riding, we still manage surprisingly low fuel consumption. And with that, we've come to the end. Time for a conclusion. Which of the two would I take home or buy if I wanted a touring bike? Honestly, it's a tough call, and it really depends on what you're looking for. But my price performance winner is definitely the new Tiger Sport 800. It brings along almost everything you could want. I can easily do without the fancy display. The unit on the Tiger 900 GT Pro is nicer. You've also got a USB socket built directly into the cockpit, which is very practical. A small drawback in practice though. The charging output, at least with my iPhone, was so low that it wasn't possible to run Google Maps navigation and charge at the same time. In fact, it wasn't even able to maintain the phone's battery level. It actually went down while connected. So there seems to be something going on with the electronics there. I then tried it with the socket under the seat on both bikes, and there it was no problem. So it's a bit puzzling why Triumph fitted it this way, but that's how it is. Apart from that, as I've already mentioned, a nice big display, more features, lots of cool details. So if I were often traveling 2-up, I'd definitely go for the GT Pro out of these 2 models. And if money's no object, then features like heated seats are of course absolutely brilliant because they really do extend the riding season. You don't need to be riding in Scotland to appreciate that. It's just as useful in our climate in autumn or spring. When it gets a bit cooler, it's simply something really pleasant. And I'm always glad to have it available. And I make good use of it. For all the sporty riders out there, in my view, the decision has to fall in favor of the Tiger Sport. It really lives up to its name. A fantastic bike with impressive cornering performance and a brilliant engine feel. So in the engine chapter, for me, it's the winner here in this comparison. When it comes to comfort and suspension though, the GT Pro is ahead in my book because it simply offers the more complete package with higher end components fitted. And despite its touring enduro genes, it can still be ridden very sportily on the road. But now it's your turn. I hope I've managed to inspire you about the NC500. I hope I've inspired you about riding in Scotland too. It really is a unique experience. Come here if you ever get the chance. Otherwise, all that's left for me is to thank you for watching and say a warm goodbye. Take care.